we should be able to get everybody in that has signed up. We're going to do our best. If you would come down, Leonard Foster, Carolyn Lubenow, Tupac Enrique, Keith Franklin, and then Karen Francis Begay. So if I've called your name and you're not here, I'm going to have to move you down. And so this will be Leonard Foster. Thank you. You have the floor.
Leonard Peltier bahadesti Kia ani ein slon satlani was is chen troba ida che enagani ida chenal got ana be khun slon le tsao so yedo ado yesanasha. I'd like to express my appreciation for the opportunity to read a short statement on behalf of my clients, Native Americans that are incarcerated in state prisons and federal penitentiaries, and specifically my brother, Leonard Peltier. And I'd like to read this for the record. My name is Lenny Foster. I'm the program supervisor for the Navajo Nation Corrections Project in Window Rock, Arizona. I also serve as a board member for the International Indian Treaty Council, which promotes sovereignty and self-determination of indigenous peoples and recognition and protection of indigenous rights, treaties, traditional culture, and sacred lands. Over the past 30 years, I have visited 96 state and federal correctional facilities throughout the United States and provided spiritual counseling to approximately 2,000 indigenous men and women. I have observed the extreme racism and discrimination toward our religious and spiritual beliefs and practices, which makes it difficult for Native prisoners to participate in traditional ceremonies in a consistent manner, if at all. I have both witnessed and experienced harassment, interference, indifference, intimidation, discrimination with regard to our traditional beliefs and our right to worship in a traditional manner as practiced by our ancestors. Prison officials have refused to allow Native ceremonies to be offered as last rites to death row prisoners, for an example. Officials claim that ceremonies will be used as a means of escape or that singing and drumming is disruptive to the security of an institution. Tobacco has been restricted for ceremonies with the assertion that prisoners are smoke-free environments. It's common knowledge that most Native peoples are incarcerated due to alcohol or substance-related offenses. Addiction, however, has long been recognized as a public health issue. As such, it is best addressed through traditional, spiritual, cultural practices and beliefs. Native prisoners who are allowed to participate in traditional, religious, and spiritual practices become model prisoners, more culturally viable, respectful, and responsible, and contributing citizens in their Native communities upon release. Denial of access to traditional, religious, and spiritual ceremonies and services is a violation of human and constitutional rights and is tantamount to a denial of opportunity for recovery and spiritual healing. I therefore recommend that the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous People seek compliance with and enforcement through the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People for the free exercise of religion as an important human and civil rights for Native prisoners. As you recall, Native American activist Leonard Peltier was wrongfully convicted in connection with the 2 deaths of Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI. Despite the court's acknowledgement of FBI prosecutor misconduct in the case, Peltier has been in prison since 1976, over 36 years. Therefore, I recommend that the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous People seek compliance through the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and demand a congressional investigation into the human rights and constitutional violations suffered by Leonard Peltier. I invite the Special Rapporteur to also visit Leonard Peltier at the United States Penitentiary in Coleman, Florida. I further request that you actively seek a grant of executive clemency to Leonard Peltier by President Barack Obama. I urge President Obama to put this tragic chapter of American civil rights history to rest in an honorable fashion. Should further delays ensue, justice may well come too late for any true healing or reconciliation to occur between the United States government and its native citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So
we really need your help, brother.
Thank you.
Mr. Anaya. So if you could take it to heart, you could read the full text, and it would be a real step towards reconciliation if you were able to go visit him and talk to him in person.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Carolyn Lubinal, is she here? We next have Eve Reyes, is that correct? Yes.
Amishpancinco, Nawanyolke, Notoka, Ivi Aguirre, Tlatoka, Nawakali, Iskaloteca, Mexica. Good afternoon, Special Rapporteur Anaya, representatives of Indigenous peoples, sisters and brothers. As Nikan Tlaka Indigenous peoples, we are honored to have this opportunity to participate in the first mission by the UN Special Rapporteur on Indigenous peoples to examine the situation of Indigenous peoples in the context of law and policies of the USA. We also wish to acknowledge that as this session is intended to review the situation of Indigenous peoples against the backdrop of the standards of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, it is essential that the clarification be forcefully made that the UN DRIP is not a domestic document, but enshrines at the international level of human rights law the fundamental principle that the right of self-determination of Indigenous peoples precludes the right of states to take under their own control the designation of cultural or legal identity of the nations and pueblos of Indigenous peoples and their constituencies. Self-definition is the precept of self-determination. In conformity with your mandate as Special Rapporteur to identify, exchange, and promote best practices, we respectfully request that you accept the attached documentation and video archive of testimony from the Indigenous Peoples Forum on the Impact of the Doctrine of Discovery, which was conducted in the Arizona State Capitol House of Representatives on March 23, 2012. Hosted by the Native American Caucus of the Arizona State Legislature and presided by the Autumn Hemjukam, the event was organized by Tonatiara in complement to the preliminary study on the impact of the Doctrine of Discovery by the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, with the intent of presenting the UN system and the principles of the world an example of how the standards articulated in the UN DRIP can be utilized in order to redefine the relationship between the Indigenous peoples and the states. The Indigenous Peoples Forum on the Impact of the Doctrine of Discovery here in Arizona was a historic achievement. We believe the Indigenous Peoples Forum on the Impact of the Doctrine of Discovery, hosted at the Arizona State Capitol, is a glimpse of a new systematic standard which points the way towards the redefinition of relationships among states and Indigenous peoples and implementation of the standards of the UN DRIP. We hereby respectfully submit the attached report video and documentation from the Arizona Forum on the Impact of the Doctrine of Discovery for consideration at the 11th session of the UN Permanent Forum of Indigenous Issues, where this subject is a special theme for the discussion on the agenda. Last year, on March 14, 2011, Tonatiara hosted a regional hearing on the impact of the Doctrine of Discovery on Indigenous peoples, which was held at the Pueblo Grande Historic Site in Phoenix. With representatives from across North America, including Mexico, this first regional hearing was organized to complement the preliminary study on the impact of the doctrine of discovery being realized by the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. On March 16, 2012, members of several traditional indigenous communities of Arizona took part in a 3-day spiritual run from Tucson to Phoenix, which delivered a communique to the Arizona Department of Education demanding that the UN study the doctrine of discovery to be integrated into the social studies curriculum standards for implementation across the spectrum of services delivered by the Arizona Department of Education at all levels across the state. As of this date of this conference today, under the auspices of the UN Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Peoples, Dona Tierra has received a response from the Office of the Arizona Superintendent of Public Instruction that this demand is under consideration and review. The Indigenous Peoples Forum on the Impact and the Doctrine of Discovery on March 23rd was a series of presentations and exchanges among the indigenous peoples and their representatives as nations and pueblos that lasted 3 hours on the floor of the Arizona House of Representatives. The event was also streamed globally, live from the floor of the state capitol complex via internet, and is now an official proceeding to be archived permanently at the Arizona State Legislature. The Indigenous Peoples Forum called for collective corrective actions to be taken at all levels, from the community, from the local community to the regional territory, from the continental to the global, in order to address the violations of human rights of indigenous peoples, which have been perpetrated and continue to damage the spirit of humanity under the guise of the doctrine of discovery and the underlying framework of domination. To quote the conference documents, "We call for this process to continue and prevail in the spirit of truth over the distortions of doctrine, not for merely the purpose of redress of past violations, but to actually engage in collective corrective action in order to move forward with self-determination towards our common destiny as humanity and in maturity as children of the nations and pueblos of Mother Earth." Special Rapporteur Anaya, this process, which is referenced in the statement, is the same process which brings us here together today. In moving towards recognition, respect, and protection of the rights of indigenous people from local to global scale, as they are articulated in the UN DRIP, the initial challenge is to confront the sets of cognition, such as the doctrine of discovery, that have perpetrated the deformation and the consciousness of humanity as a whole and justified colonialism against indigenous peoples and Mother Earth.
If you could conclude, please.
These are our recommendations. We affirm the request of the North American Indigenous Peoples Caucus for a deep exploration of the manner of which the doctrine of Christian discovery has been constructed, elaborated, and applied. We submit that the process and content of Indigenous Peoples Forum on the Doctrine of Discovery on the 23rd of March, held in Arizona, be integrated into the theme of the 11th session of the UN Permanent Forum as an example of best practices that reflect implementation of strategies of the UN DRIP. We request that the Special Rapporteur on the rights of indigenous people communicate to the Arizona Department of Education to inquire regarding the demand by indigenous peoples of Arizona to integrate the UN Permanent Forum study on the doctrine of discovery. We recommend that in furtherance of the objectives of the UN Permanent Forum on the doctrine of discovery, special attention and support be given to the impact of the doctrine on international trade agreements such as NAFTA.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Keith Franklin. And Julie, if you could adjust that mic for him. Good. And while Keith is getting ready, I'm going to call Edmund Ray, Winona Benally, Manny Pino, Josephine Cardenas, and Dennis Manuel, if you would come down and sit here in the reserve seats.
Don't start my clock yet.
I'm not, don't worry. All right, you may
Dr.
begin.
Anaya, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you again. And Governor Garcia, thank you for your hospitality. And I think it's Garcia, I'm sorry. The Total people are very hospitable. Had a good time. I've got 3 minutes worth right here, and I've got to read all this or in 5 minutes. But part of this, I wanted to start out and talk. I'm talking about education, and there's two parts of this that I'd like to talk to you. The problems cannot be solved at the same level of awareness that created them, and that was a quote by Einstein. So I wanted to talk about the urban Indian population. And I just wanted to make sure that we were indigenous people still. Because when we leave the reservations, we seem to be excommunicated from many of the activities and treated like somebody that shouldn't be there. But we're talking about just in the state of New Mexico, and I'm on the New Mexico Indian Education Advisory Council for the Secretary. And we're finding that we've got 36,000 urban Indians in the system, and they're flunking. I mean, really bad. We're the lowest in all of our proficiencies. We've got a gap, an education gap that runs right around 39 to 40, and it's constant. And we've had that problem since 2004. We have the highest truancy. We have the highest dropouts. And I'm sure a lot of you people, I'm preaching to the choir, but we have a lot of problems within in Albuquerque. And what's happening to our children is that when we go before the superintendent and the school boards, we don't really get accepted as the speaker for our community. Because when we look at our children breakout, we have around 6,000 children in that system. And most of them are from the local Pueblos and the Navajo and the Apache. And so when we look at it, we go to that table as a Sac and Fox from Oklahoma, and I speak for those kids, trying to get something changed. And it's very important that all you tribal leaders, especially the Navajos, when we go in, half of that 6,000 are Navajo children. And I, as a Sac and Fox, are talking for your kids. Your people, your tribal people should be there with me at that table to talk the issues. And that's really on every tribe, on every state. The tribal people need to stand up and take care of the business of their tribal people, even though they're off reservation. Those kids need help, really need help, because we're just not making it. And one thing I wanted to talk about also is when we go to these meetings like this one here, it's tribal. You never see urban Indian. And if you look at the census, out of the 4 million Indians that they identified in 2000, 3/4 of them were urban Indians that live off the reservation, and 1 million lived on. And IHS and any other institution that gives us money, it goes to that 1 million that's living on a reservation. And we don't have the representation that we should because we're the majority now that live off. And of course, we were told back in the old days that we were going to go out and get an education, do what we needed to do, then come back and work on a reservation. But there's no jobs, there's no economy. So our problem is that we stay where we go because we do get jobs, and the brain trust is there. But I think as a special rapporteur, that when we're talking about urban, we're getting like anybody else. And in the future, it looks like that the way the things are going that we're perceiving it is we may not be tribes in the next 10 years. We may just run up against that wall where the United States government will say, well, we got 4 million living off the res and 1 million on. Why do we have a reservation? Why don't we just go ahead and assimilate everybody? And that's something that we really need to take care of and make sure that we don't let them do that. And really get involved together as urbans and as tribal people and attack this issue together. So I could go on, but I gave you the 3-minute speech that I've got right here.
Thank you.
Behind you, and I really appreciate you letting me speak about the urban population. Thank you.
And we appreciate observing the time limit. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Edmund Ray.
My name is Edmund Ray. I'm from the Four Corners area. I'm a Navajo. Greetings to the panel and to the Special Rapporteur, James Anaya. There are problems with self-determination when self is missing. That is when the Indian nations actually have the authority to operate a program, they must do. The Nahaza Law, the Native American Housing and Self-Determination Act, is an example of self-determination program. It permits flexibility to the choice of housing programs that requires involvement locally, and that's in Article 13, with the private sector. This requires assessments that involve communities, such as mine, and identify their needs, and requires annual Indian housing plans for intelligent development when the minds come together. The problem is that if the tribal designated housing entity does not follow these requirements, self-determination does not work. That is our problem. We feel that there must be needs assessment that involve communities in local areas that allow the public and our program to identify local needs and what the people want in that community. What might that include? That includes encouraging local small businesses for goods and services, daycare, employment training, support, and the like. There must be Indian housing plans that accurately assess the need, fairly allocate funding resources, like Nahaza, MFA, and encourage community nonprofit organizations, such as I have. I have an interest because I am the president of the community nonprofit organization entitled the Shiprock Community Development Corporation, and we have such a project going, and it does exist. Our presenters identified the need for good governance and follow the law. We agree. We think that the United Nations should remind everyone that there is an individual human right to development, Article 13, so as to encourage initiatives such as ours. But there is an overall obligation to make certain that organizations such as ours can actually carry out the right to development, self-determination. There is a private sector in the Indian country economies, and it must be supported and encouraged. It is there. It's out there for us to take advantage of. I'm going to tell you a little story real quick. There's a little Navajo family decided to go and visit another part of the family on the other side of the reservation. So as you know it, Native Americans, when one goes, everyone goes. So they all climb in the van. Parents, kids, 5 kids, and grandma. They travel down the road and journey. They get to that family member on the other side of the reservation. And when they get there, they visit, greet, and eat well. And they're returning home. And as usually on this journey, they have to stop midpoint, refuel, get some snacks, and do the other part of the business for the kids. Well, everyone does that, gas up, everyone climbs back in the van, and they take off. And the driver, the father, the patriarch, says, wait, we're missing someone. We need to take a head count. So-and-so said, yes, I'm here, I'm here. Then he says, where's grandma? Grandma says, I'm here. Okay, he says, somebody's still missing. And then he say, oh no, it's Junior. We left Junior behind. Brakes come on, there's a big skid in the middle of the road, a quick U-turn, and they go back. And on their way back, they see Junior in front of the store with an ice cream cone. They forgot Junior. Well, we are all here as leaders, keepers of our families here, of the tribes that we belong to and have responsibility to. We are listeners. And that's probably one of the greatest callings we will ever have, is to listen, to really listen, to understand what are the needs of the people. If we really listen, we can become great leaders and understand what needs to be done. So I encourage everyone to be leaders who have been ordained or called to this particular calling or elected, to really listen, to put your ear down to the ground, to Mother Earth, and listen to her with your heart and understand what she's speaking to you, to have compassion, to honor one another, to respect one another, and to love and appreciate what you have in this world. Thank you.
I don't think Winona here, Winona Benally. Winona is running for Congress, so I know she was on the road and wanted to have a chance to speak. Weren't able to get her in, but she's one of ours from the University of Arizona grad. We're very proud of her. She'd be the first Native American woman elected to Congress, so Winona Benally, remember that name. So, Manny, Pino.
Guawahati, Haupa Hundred. Dawat Jaya Shapka, Haupa. Good afternoon. I would like to acknowledge the Tohono O'odham people on whose traditional lands and territories we are situated at this hearing. Thank you for having us. I'm going to start with a little story about the rapporteur here, in that it's nice to see a former New Mexico Lobo who has achieved this position. Right? We were in a couple undergraduate classes together at the University of New Mexico. I won't say how long ago, but many moons ago. I am here to this afternoon to address a breach of trust by our trustee, the United States government, in correlation to extractive industries that have been existent on our lands and territories for over the last 50 years. Specifically in my area of Mother Earth, Laguna and Acoma Pueblos. Having grown up in the heart of what is known as the Grants Mineral Belt, the largest ore producing area for uranium over the last probably 65 years. Uranium mines, mills were located in the Grants Mineral Belt. Numerous aspects of our traditional life, our traditional-based knowledge have been threatened by uranium mining in our area. Our sister pueblo to the east, Laguna, housed for 30 years the Jack Pile Mine. The Jack Pile Mine grew to be the largest open-pit uranium mine in the world. 24 million tons of ore were extracted from this mine over that 30-year time period. 90% of that 24 million tons went to one source, the Department of Defense of the United States, to make weapons of mass destruction. And when we inform our elders, you know, that this big hole in their front yard, the Jack Pile Mine was situated 2,000 feet from the village of Guawahati, a village of approximately 3,000 residents. Never in the history of the negotiation process in the early 1950s were the people of the village of Guawahati given their free, prior, and informed consent concerning this development project. The United States government acted on behalf of indigenous peoples in extractive industries. Our neighbors to the west, our brothers and sisters, the Dene people of the Navajo Nation, have experienced similar atrocities, even in greater capacities than Laguna Pueblo, as we currently have over 1,000 unreclaimed mines on the Navajo Nation. Another breach of trust by our so-called fiduciary responsible party, the United States government. All aspects of the environment have been degraded: the air, the land, the water, the flora, the fauna. That, as I said, impacts our traditional-based knowledge, our traditional lives. One of the most negative experiences of this 50-year legacy is, most importantly, the impact to human health. In the process of mining uranium, these chemical derivatives that we call radionuclides are cancer-causing agents. These violations of human rights that exist on reservations such as Laguna, Acoma, the Navajo Nation, the Spokane Nation in Washington, the Lakota Nations along the Powder River Basin and the Upper Great Plains, in provinces in Canada where the most intensive mining for uranium is going on today have similar problems that we were experiencing 30 years ago. The same process is being repeated over and over. Our food security in close proximity to these contaminated areas, our food sovereignty have been impacted as we continue to grow our crops in close proximity to these contaminants. As we continued, like the Navajo Nation, to graze our livestock in close proximity to these contaminated areas that have gotten into the food chain. So we have not only an impacted mining population who have been impacted by these injustices, but people who didn't earn 1 cent from the uranium industry. Rapporteur Anaya, I ask you that you take these issues to heart. It is condemning every aspect of our life in these processes. The 50-year legacy of the nuclear fuel chain on indigenous peoples' lands must be stopped, especially in light of the global catastrophe that occurred on March 11th, 2011 at Fukushima, Japan. Thank you for your time.
Our next speakers will be Josefina Cardenas and Dennis Manuel, and they're going to split their time. And in the meantime, while they're getting set up, if Faith Hall, Mike Wilson, Norman Raishin, and Peter Clark come down.
Thank you, Professor, for allowing me to be first. But being here in native land, I pass the word to my brother Otam.
Hello, I'm Dennis Manuel. I'm Don Autumn. I'm here to support Josefina's efforts on the plans for the A Mountain project. We're at the present time we're trying to create a site there for a multicultural center. We're combining efforts to work on this project. And we had to go back in our history as Autumn, because these are our Autumn territories here, and get the history on the A Mountain itself. And what we find out is that it was used for a site. It's also a sacred site for, we call it a protector, because it was used for a lookout site for enemy approaching anytime. In the old days, that's what they used for a lookout. And so they asked us to join in with the group to support the spiritual side of it, or the Autumn traditional side of the project. So we're at the present time working with the San Javier district. And so far we've got community support. We still have meetings to attend to see if we can get this on the way. And Josefina can fill you in more on this. I'd just like to go back a ways on who I am and where I come from. I've worked for the protection of sacred sites, and this has been going on for 30 years that I've been working with Ernest Moristo, who resides at the foot of Guawahati Mountains, which is the most sacred site of Autumn territories. It's home of Iitoy, our creator. So we were protecting that from development back for the past 25 years that I've been with them, but the family's been there from time immemorial and recognized for their is carrying on the traditional way of the caretaking of the area. So, but so far we won our case in the courts, the tribal courts. So we're moving forward on our project up in Guawahati to protect it. And now we are on this other project with A Mountain. So Josefina will fill you in, and I thank you for hearing me out. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Dennis. Yo soy Josefina Contreras Cárdenas y nativa de Tucson, Arizona. I'm native here from Tucson, Arizona, and born and raised where in the barrio my father was raised, and I have raised my children, now my grandchildren. And it happens to be below Sentinel Peak, a mountain, Tucson, the original birthplace of Tucson, along the Santa Cruz River. And learning the history of the land, it's even more sacred of how to preserve that site, being the original birthplace of Tucson. Mike Wilson, we once had in '99 a procession of the 4 directions to the site of prayer. Before there was a bond election in 1999 to preserve those lands. It was called Rio Nuevo, and most of us are familiar with that development that the city hasn't been able to come through. But the most important part is to preserve that land, the birthplace of Tucson, because it has been so much desecrated. There was first a brickyard that made a hole, and we might be standing right now in those bricks that our ancestors' remains were used to develop those bricks. And then from that hole, the city of Tucson came and made it as a landfill. And from that landfill, the water went into our barrios, and our families had to drink that water. So being from Tucson, I ask, how can we preserve that land? Professor Williams has been with us to protect Tucson and respect that land how it needs to be deserves to be respected after all that passed. And that land is not by itself. It connects to so many families, so many ranches, so many gardens. And I plead here to come together and preserve what we have. And I have the belief that spiritually, if we come together to preserve this land, and it's the heart of Tucson, and it's hurting now, and we let it bloom, Creator's will that there'll be more healing within our city, that it will extend to families, our youth, our elders, and the whole city of Tucson and the state of Arizona, because look what we're going through right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Special Rapporteur, I was approached by a very beautiful young Native woman activist at lunch who asked if I could use my influence with the Special Rapporteur to have her make a statement for 1 minute, and that's Faith Hall. So would you come up, Faith?
My name is Faith Hall. I want to talk about the oil and the water. I believe that people should not drill oil where people live because more people will die, and everyone in this room drinks water. Thank you.
She promised it would be short, so thank you very much. And again, I know any Indian event, a Native event, we always bring our children, and the children have just been wonderful. So for those of you who've parented those children, congratulations, and it's just our honor to have them here. So hope to see you up here maybe 20 years, 15 years. So thank you very much, all of you. Next we have Mike Wilson. I hate to do that to you, Mike, to follow a little kid. That's always tough in show business, but
matter of fact, I think it's an honor to follow children.
Thank you.
For we've been taught that such is the kingdom. I have a slide to show, but I want to give you a brief history of what I do, where I do, but most significantly, why I do it. What we've been talking about for the last 2 days is human rights. And we've been using this declaration, United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, to protect us from this historical and present oppression. But my question now is, What about when native governments are the oppressor? What about when native governments are now the victimizer? So what this shows is which we call in the social justice community, a death map. From 1999 to 2009, this is a composite map. Every dot is a migrant death. And if you look closely on the Tohono Nation, too many migrants are dying on tribal land in Indian country. Case in point. We know now from the Pima County Office of Medical Examiner that in fiscal year 2010, there were 253 known migrant deaths in southern Arizona. I found out last year in the Tohono Runner, and I have to quote the Runner, the nation's own newspaper, because I have been accused of lying. So from our own Runner, the police department said in 2010, there were 125 migrant deaths on the Tohono Nation. Look around. I stopped counting that there's more than 100 of us in here. This is equivalent to every one of us here dying for lack of water on the Tohono Nation. Where is the moral accountability? Where is the UN Declaration? Does it apply to us as indigenous people? Does it apply to us in Indian country? Or are we exempt? Are we excluded from moral accountability? Are we excluded from this myth of equal? See, because to be equal means we are equally accountable. And here, I put out water on the nation. I used to put out by the barrels. But the tribal police has confiscated my water barrels. So I had to go back to put out gallons of water. This is what happens to water on the Tohono Nation that's left behind for migrants in distress. Economic refugees, like we used to be, slashed by tribal members, Border Patrol, or tribal police. And where is our moral accountability? What does this say about us as Native people? I've heard for the last 2 days about how sacred we are. This makes a mockery of our sense of self-sacredness. See, because to say that we're sacred, to refer to sacred sites means that we reference ourselves as sacred. I've heard too much for the last 2 days. A lot of religiosity, a lot of prayers, but very, very little spirituality. We are rich in rituals, but in poverty when it comes to spirituality. And this is evidence of who we are. We as Native peoples, we must hold ourselves accountable for human beings suffering and dying on the Tohono Nation.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Norman Raishin. While Norman, are you Norman? I'm sorry, yes, if you come up. And while Norman's getting set up, I'm going to call down Peter Clark, Michael Rios, Rashid Stone Coyote, Mary Lane, and Lorraine Zamora. If you would come down if you're here. Have I messed up? No. Okay. All right, thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm Norman Raishin. I'm Navajo and Laguna. On my Navajo side, I'm Kia'ani. On my Laguna side, I'm Shush Dene. And thank you for allowing me to be here this afternoon, Mr. Anaya. It's good to see you again. I mean, I know we've talked before. My discussion today is going to be something that Mr. Franklin started talking about, and that's the fact that we have 25% of our people on reservations and 75% of our people off reservations. And a lot of time our people that live off reservation really don't participate in this so-called participation, being heard, and being able to talk to our leaders. And somehow we need to bring all these people together so that we can have these discussions, because we have things to say that are important. Over the last day and a half, we've been talking about health care. We've been talking about education. We've been talking about human and civil rights. We've been talking about violence against women. We've been talking about domestic violence and violence against children. We've been talking about all these various issues, and I don't know where our tribal leaders come off believing that when we move off the reservation, we don't have these same problems and we don't need the leadership. I know many times I've been told myself, who elected you? Who made you the leader? Who let you speak for us? Who asked you to speak for us? Well, nobody has asked me to speak, but I'm like the gentleman that just left all those bottles there. You know, who's going to be accountable? Do we say when our grandchildren leave the reservation that it's okay to die because you don't get health care? Is it okay for these things to happen to our women? Is it okay for these things to happen when you're off reservation? Or did we turn into some other kind of Indian that's not here? I know that a lot of our tribal leaders who I really respect for the job that they do on the reservations, and that's good, but when we leave reservations, then it's kind of like we're the forgotten people. We have no place to go. We have what's called government to government to government, and that, from what I understand, means that governments talk to each other, but none of those governments include us, and that's why I'm glad that you're doing this today. Maybe it's a good start for everybody to see what you're doing and bringing both those people that live on and off reservation together to listen to us and to try to do something with the concerns that we have all over the country. So that's, you know, one of the things that, you know, I wanted to talk about today, because they're very important. I know a number of times I've written to the federal government when they come and they want to listen to issues on crime, they want to listen to issues on education, but I don't get an invitation. If I want to go over there, I have to break in and I have to make some kind of excuse, or I just have to force myself into being able to make some kind of presentation, and they don't spend any time listening to us anyway. So I think that, you know, as tribal leaders, as concerned indigenous people, that we all have to come together. We all have concerns. We all have to be accountable for the things that our people do, whether they're on or whether they're off reservation, and we got to help as many people as we can, because that's our responsibility to one another, you know. And so I'm glad that we're having this meeting, and I hope that we have more meetings. But I think that, again, we need to come together as Indian peoples, not one tribe, not two tribes, but all the tribes need to come together on and off reservation and provide, you know, this kind of support. You know, one of the things that I look at is this thing called, they call Obamacare, or universal health care. And I hear people say, well, they passed the Indian Health Care Improvement Act. So what does that mean? Does that mean that becomes part of Obamacare? Does it mean we get more money? Does it mean we get less money? I know when I talked to the senator in New Mexico, and I asked him, well, you know, we gave our land, we gave our resources, we gave everything away, and we're already paid up. And when we signed the treaty, you said we'll provide health care and education. And then his response to me was, nobody gets a free ride, Norman, we all have to pay. So we've already paid, And we need to do something about it. We need to change the rules. We need to change the regulation. We need to make sure that they're up to date, that they're not still 40 or 50 years past, and people are reading those rules and regulations. That's why it takes us so long to do anything, whether it's business, whether it's our lands, whether it's our health care, whether it's our education. It takes too long. So I think that something needs to be done, not only just with this group here, but with people all around the country to be able to have input into all those rules and regulations, so that from that maybe we can move forward. Maybe we can get into business faster. Maybe we'll all get health care. We've been getting $3 billion for our health care as Native Americans, and they say that's $2,000 a piece for our health care. But if you really take the number of Native Americans that nobody really wants to count, we got about $14 or $15 billion that we should be getting for health care. And that isn't something that we said, well, you have to give it to us. That's something the government promised us and said, if you stop killing us, if you let us take your resources and your land, this is what we're going to give you in return. Well, that hasn't ever been delivered on, and we'd like to see something happen about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Peter Clark.
Good afternoon. My name is Peter Clark. I'm the International Chapter Coordinator for Leonard Peltier Defense Offense Committee. The committee has over 200 chapters around the world fighting for Leonard's freedom. As you know, Leonard Peltier was accused in connection with the deaths on June 26, 1975 of 2 FBI agents on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. Government documents show that without any evidence whatsoever, the FBI decided from the beginning of its investigation to lock Peltier into the case, and that is the FBI's direct from their own memos. In accordance with the Jay Treaty, ratified by the United States and Canada, and well after the incident on Pine Ridge Reservation, Mr. Peltier legally crossed the border into Canada, where he sought asylum. At the request of the U.S. government, he was arrested in February 1976. U.S. prosecutors knowingly presented false statements to a Canadian court to extradite Mr. Peltier to the United States. The statements were signed by a woman who was forced by the FBI, knowingly presented false statements to a Canadian court to extradite Mr. Peltier to the U.S. The statements were coerced from this witness. The government has long since admitted that the woman was not present during the incident at Pine Ridge. Meanwhile, in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, the jury in the trial of Leonard's 2 co-defendants found that the Indian activists had a right to be on the Pine Ridge Reservation and were not engaged in any unlawful activity. There was no evidence that they either provoked an assault or were the aggressors in one. In light of the terror on Pine Ridge Reservation during the previous 3 years, the history of misconduct on the part of the FBI in cases involving Indian activists, and the reckless behavior of the agents on June 26, 1975, the jury decided that Mr. Peltier's co-defendants were not guilty by reason of self-defense. Had Leonard Peltier been tried with his co-defendants, he too also would have been acquitted. Unhappy with the outcome of that trial, prosecutors set the stage for Mr. Peltier's conviction. His trial was moved to an area known for its anti-Indian sentiment, Fargo, North Dakota. The trial judge had a reputation for ruling against Indians, and a juror is known to have made racist comments during Mr. Peltier's trial. Due to the judge's rulings made most often in favor of the prosecution, the Peltier jury never heard the majority of evidence that had been presented at that Cedar Rapids trial. The FBI's own documents prove that the prosecution went so far as to manufacture a so-called murder weapon. A test showed that the gun and the shell casings entered into evidence did not match, but the FBI hid this fact from the jury. Unable to adequately defend himself, Mr. Peltier was convicted and sentenced to 2 life terms. Mr. Peltier has been denied a new trial on a legal technicality. He also was denied clemency and parole in 2009. Mr. Peltier has already served a major portion of his sentence and is being unnecessarily held in prison despite the fact that his continued imprisonment does little to serve even the principal purposes of his punishment. Mr. Peltier has been designated a political prisoner by Amnesty International, and that organization has repeatedly called for his unconditional release. Nelson Mandela, the late Mother Teresa, 55 members of the U.S. Congress, including a judge who sat as a member of the court in 2 of Mr. Peltier's appeals, have all called for his immediate release. United Nations officials, including Mary Robinson, former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, also voiced support for Mr. Peltier's freedom. Time is running out for Leonard Peltier. I would like to reiterate Mr. Len Foster's request that Mr. Anaya make an official visit with Leonard Peltier, and that the Special Rapporteur call upon the U.S. government to free Leonard Peltier immediately. And I would like to acknowledge, as a person of European descent, I am humbled to be among guests here, and I thank you for your hospitality.
Thank you. Michael Rios.
Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Rios. I'm going to change the process of the program a little bit and tell you a story about my family. I'm a Liseño Indian from the band of Temecula Indians in Southern California. I'm a descendant from Pietra Tosabal, which is my 4th great-great-grandmother. We are here to let the United Nations know of just one clan struggle as Indians at the hand of our own people. Those who have been banished and denied membership include many Alatis, including myself, and the Tosabal clan, would be adversely affected if no reform and sanction on the very tribes that commit crimes against their people, their own people, are not held accountable or bound by restraint requirements by Congress, and a reform new Indian Civil Rights Amendment attached and monitored by Congress, the current Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968. Could this be that these tribes are committing civil and criminal acts and blanketing them with sovereignty with no accountability for their action? Sovereignty provides safe haven for the tribal government officials who have stripped or denied numerous Alatis of rights set forth in tribal and federal law shall be responsible for satisfying the very same individual Temecula Indians' entitlement to land allotted to them. The restrict membership, heritage, culture, birthright, and land ownership access handed down for generations. Tosabal clan has requested it to build on their own land for many years. We hear things like, no, you cannot build on your land. We will stop you from using the roads to access your land. Last year, descendants of Pietra Tosabal were restricted from accessing our allotment on the reservation. The banishment and exclusion occurred when they went to the reservation to burn sage and pray that we be allowed to reclaim our heritage. They were quickly surrounded by tribal rangers and detained for questioning, even after providing proof of ownership and allotment that we were on. On November 4th of 2009, family members were once again detained when they attempted to access their land. And on January 2nd, 2010, family members were stopped, detained, notified that they had been banished and could not come onto reservation to access their allotment. At that time, 90-day notices of restriction pending life exclusion were given to Pietra Tosabal's descendants. Since the most recent banishment, Tosabal descendants have received letters from the tribal council stating that the band recognizes their ownership interest in allotments on the reservation. However, we cannot use tribal roads, the only means of getting to our property, to access our land. Tosabal descendants have made numerous attempts to address the banishment issue with tribal officials, but we have not been provided with any information or process by which to appeal or our exclusion and banishment. Consider the band's actions to deny Pietra Tosabal citizenship and access to our allotment. I do not want tribal officials negotiating my rights in any matter concerning my allotment right to access my land or build upon it without knowledge and approval. The Tosabal clan wants to build on their land. The United States Trust responsibility is not limited to management of Indian funds or even the land and resources that are held in trust. It involves the entire federal-tribal relationship, from the role of the U.S. Constitution in providing the preemptive force of federal law over state intrusion into Indian affairs, to the obligation to protect and exercise the federal sovereignty and the right of the tribes to be self-governing. This session will address ideas for meaningful trust reform, including tribally driven consult and tribal involvement in the formulation of policy, accountability, and transparency. These tribes are not following their own constitution and bylaws. They have banished the Latis, they have illegally disenrolled, and have placed hundreds of original Indian descendants on moratoriums against their own constitution and bylaws. But the freeze on enrollment only applies to non-members. Again, they speak of sovereignty and self-governing with accountability. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you for the time. I think we're going to be able to get everybody in who has signed up, so we do appreciate you obeying the 5-minute time limit. I have Raw Shoot Stone Coyote. Then I have Mary Lane. Miss Lane.
Yajay, Honorable Special Rapporteur James Anaya. Forgotten People is a non-governmental organization incorporated in the Navajo Nation that spanned over 2 million acres of the remote desert terrain in northeastern Arizona. Most of our members do not speak, read, write English and live in a traditional subsistent lifestyle. Forgotten People wishes to address failures of the United States to remediate conditions in Hopi petition land and the former Bennett Freeze. Given the focus in the Declaration on the rights of Indigenous people on remedies for violation of human rights, our communities, lands, and water rights are essential to our physical, culture, and spiritual survival as a distinct people. In the Hopi petition land, the U.S. government is collision with the Navajo Nation, Hopi tribe, and Peabody Coal Company sacrifices us and exploited our culture and spiritual rights, and our lands and water are for energy resource exploitation. We are called transgressor on land we have continuously occupied for more than 10 generations before the long walk to Fort Sumner and creation of the Navajo and Hopi tribal governments. For over 4 decades, we survived resisting forced relocation by the U.S. government, federally funded dismantling of all our water sources, federally funded confiscated of our animals, and we are denied the right to build and repair our homes. We are forced to live under a foreign Navajo Hopi tribal government with no participation, no civil rights, no right to vote, and no representation. By failing to resolve the dispute it helped create, the U.S. government, through its Relocation Commission, is Hopi petition land, intends to clear out lands for large-scale minerals and water exploitation, exploration, while the President Ben Shelley of the Navajo Nation refused to help us and tells us our land is lawless. A 43 years U.S. government imposed Bennett Freeze was lifted by President Obama in 2009, but we cannot find any funding or plan for rehabilitation, for infrastructure, housing, water, and roads. Only 3% of the family have electricity. Over 90% of the homes do not have access to piped water, requiring family to haul their water from their location. Only 24 of homes are habitable today. The U.S. EPA reports the presence of over 1,300 abandoned uranium mines and mills on the Navajo Nation, and says up to 25% of the unregulated source in our communities in the Western Navajo Nation exceeded drinking water standard for kidney toxin, including uranium. An unremediated, abandoned, upgraded uranium mill on the banks of the Little Colorado River as quantified as drinking water in the settlement maxed out U.S. Environmental Protection Agency Superfund Gregory counters on over 1 million counts a minute. In February 2012, Senator Kyle and John McCain introduced Senate Bill 2109 and House Resolution 4067, knowing of President Ben Shelley, Navajo Nation's interest in signing a controversial Little Colorado River water rights settlement without informing the Navajo Nation Council and the people. This legislation has add-on that directly benefit the Navajo generating station owns and Peabody Coal Company. The settlement grants a waiver without readdress for past, present, and future contamination of our water source. I still have more to read, but
If you could conclude, please, thank you.
And in Wakapai National Monument, a lone Navajo holdout was given special dispensation of Congress for a lifetime occupation with no right for her family's members to continue living there and without a rights of return for all families that survive a forced march across the Little Colorado River where they drunk uranium arsons contaminated water without being told, and now that they know due to a lack of infrastructure have no other choice. The recommendation, President Obama should sign a binding declaration to show this commitment to indigenous rights. The Navajo Nation should adopt the declaration as their standard for addressing water rights issues such as proposed Little Colorado River settlement introduced as Senate Bill 2109 and House Resolution 4067. The U.S. government should be held accountable and commitments made internationally, including the UN General Assembly, resolutions on the right to safe drinking water and sanitation, and the commitment by the U.S. EPA at the 2000 United Nations World Summit on sustainable development to reduce the number of its citizens lacking access of safe drinking water.
Thank you. We need to move on. Thank you very much. Thank you. Lorraine Zamora, please. And while Lorraine is getting set up, I have Marlene Benally, Kara Curry Hall, Marcia Montereschi, Leona Morgan. If you would come down and sit, and we'll be able to move more quickly. Yes, you may go, Ms. Zamora. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to say thank you to Special Rapporteur James Anaya and Robert Williams and all the Tohono Nation that is allowing us to speak today. I, too, am a descendant from the Luiseño Temecula Indians from California. I just want to kind of go over a little bit of a story that I have in continuance of what Mike Rios had said before. I, too, am from the same family that he is from. Today I want to let you know about our situation of we are not being recognized as Lanceño Indians due to the fact that we have a family of 6 who was generated from our 4th grandmother, Petra Tosoval. She had 4 children. Of those children, 1 daughter's is not being recognized. And that is due to the fact that we have, I should say, family members that are on tribal councils that are keeping us from being recognized as to why we're not told. We are not allowed to visit our land. We are allottees. There's been a water issue going on there through the state of California, and we are told that everybody has a right to, everybody has a right to vote about what happens to the water on your land. Well, that's not true, because we own land on that reservation, and we are not allowed to vote, nor are we allowed to travel on that land, because the only way on there is through tribal land itself. I just want to kind of reiterate a little bit of what Michael had said. We have submitted documentation back in 1995 to prove our lineage of our grandmother, as well as our other family members who have done the same. At that time, we were told that there were so many of us, because we were 104 strong, that we had to wait 1 year to be to have all the paperwork recognized and verified. Now, I don't understand why 3 members of a family can be recognized and 1 is not. So if any of you guys have sisters and brothers out there that aren't being recognized or even needing help, it's not fair that part of you are being helped and part of you aren't, and you're from the same blood. After submitting this documentation of our lineage and enrollment, the enrollment board has informed us that they will have to backdate us for a 1-year moratorium. Okay, about 10 months later, after receiving this letter, we received notice that we would have to wait an additional 10 months to that. So our 1 year started after the 10 months had gone by. Okay, we asked the enrollment committee for a special meeting to review any documentation that was further needed. We were told they have our documentation, we just need to wait our turn. Now, 16 years later, we are still not recognized. How long does it take? I'm asking you, Mr. Anaya, if you could please look into this situation as to why tribes have basically the control of being able to let special council members make those decisions when other family members are already recognized on that. And we also have land next to those other family members. I don't understand that. It says, also too, when my father and my cousins and my other elders in the family who could not participate today because of their age and illness, they were also told that they were not allowed to enter their land. On November 4th, when they did enter their land, as Michael did reiterate before, they were giving a notice of restriction for the 3-month banishment, saying that you could not enter your land with a possible lifetime banishment. Therefore, I brought the information. If you need any, I have left the copy of it with our, out there with your, in the reception area. What I want to say is that our family members are dying off, and all they've ever really wanted to know is to why are they not being recognized as to who they are, and why are their civil rights being denied. We want to be able to speak and make votes and decide on our own land and what will be built, what will pass through it, and who will live on it. We have children that do not know their heritage because they are not allowed to attend powwow meetings. They're not allowed to attend any type of board members or any type of membership meetings that go on there. Thank you today for listening to my, my story, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much. Marlene Benally, I see Leonard Benally is here. You'll be speaking for her.
Yeah, I'm going to read the statement on behalf of my sister here. It was unfortunate for her that she didn't make the trip here. Yate, Honorable Special Rapporteur James Anaya. Forgotten People appreciates your investigation of the human rights situation of the indigenous people living in the United States and wishes to discuss the failure of the U.S. government to protect and remediate highly radioactive abandoned uranium mines and uranium and arsenic contaminated water sources in communities spanning more than 20 million acres in the western portion of the Navajo Nation. Our communities face a serious development issue. These issues have been compounded by the 43 years of governmental imposed Bennett freeze lifted by President Barack Obama in 2009 without committing funding to or a plan for a rehabilitation. The freeze is largely responsible inadequate housing, lack of basic infrastructure such as water, paved road, and the pervasive property in our region. Only 3% of the family have electricity. Over 90% of homes do not have access to piped water, requiring families to haul their water from other locations. EPA estimates 54,000 residents of the Navajo Nation lacks access to public water system. Only 24% of the homes are inhabitable today. The freeze is responsible for an intergenerational trauma affecting people medically, physically, and psychologically. Medical studies confirm that overcrowding, in addition to an absence of running water, refrigerators, and adequate sewer disposal, adversely impacted the mental and physical health of the men residing in the former Bennett freeze. These impacts range from youth suicide to mental illness and arrays of medical ailments, including but not limited to the kidney failures and cancers. Since 1966, the population in the area has increased by approximately 65%, forcing several generations of family living together in the well that has been declared unfit for human inhabitation, results in which has been a number of large deaths from the exposure to the harsh climates. And moreover, in the XPL, we do not have decent houses and we don't have access to clean drinking water. The BIA capped it off, fenced off, and bulldozed it, all our water sources. They say that this is because that the water is contaminated, but we did not see the data and no health emergency was issued. We are concerned because the US EPA at the present says over 1,300 abandoned mines in the reservation lands alone, up to 25% of unregulated sources in the Western Navajo Nation exceeds drinking water standard for kidney detoxification, including uranium. Recommendation: the international law that protects water land rights as defined by the Declaration should be enacted, and where the laws already exist, mechanism and instruments that are a human rights violation that should set up within the United Nations jurisdiction, international criminal court case to restore lands and water and religious right to solve the Navajo refugee problems.
If you could conclude, please.
We believe the U.S. should be held accountable to commit in the international, including the UN General Assembly resolutions on the right to safe drinking waters, sanitation, are committed by the U.S. EPA in 2002, the United Nations World Summit on Sustainable Development to reduce matter of its citizen lacking access to safe drinking water and sanitation by 50% by 2015. Indigenous people must have control over their own natural resource. We must have rights to free, prior, informed consent to ensure laws that are passed, are blessed and good for the people. We pray for help and the human rights to clean water and decent houses on the HPL for the new people.
Thank you very much. Kara Curry Hall.
Thank you. I'm going to try to stick to my script here. Honorable Rapporteur, thank you for being here, but for being the voice of those people that cannot speak for themselves, because there's so many. And I'm here on the same, speaking for many who cannot speak for themselves, and they're Alatis. In particular, I'm speaking on behalf of the Alatis of the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation. In this country, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was endorsed, and that decision was announced by the President of the United States of America. The decision of who would make that announcement was made by his office, and it has the full weight of the President. It has the power that his office holds. However, the President's government is failing him, and it's failing the Indigenous peoples. The United States Geological Survey in 2007 confirmed that there are over 4 billion barrels of recoverable oil in what they call the Bakken oil play. My husband made reference to it yesterday. In 2007, it was as though a tsunami hit the reservation, and everybody was telling you to sign this lease right here, right now. In 2008, with the current chairman and a few others, 7 people in total, we lobbied all over Washington, D.C., to the Congressional Delegation, Department of Interior, the Bureau of Land Management, for a one-stop shop to change the administrative procedures. But we based the argument on Article 32. There must be free, prior, informed consent prior to any planning or development for the extraction of minerals. They all thought I was crazy, and all the suits in Washington, D.C. said, yeah, I heard about that, but nobody gave consideration to it. You cannot extract until you come and ask the owners. The Alatis of the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation have found themselves in the middle of the biggest oil play in the country. They own some of the most valuable property and resources in the nation. To state an example of how valuable they are, that within a 30-day period, oil royalty payments to Alatis alone, which is 70% of the land base, are being paid $12 million for 30 days of extraction. And it's growing. The projections are enormous. To date, they've been paid with the tribe in the last 5 years over $280 million. With the exception of the BIA Oil and Gas Status Report, which has been provided to you, there is no transparency or reported record of how the royalties are being spent, despite Alatis passing a resolution in what is called a General Council meeting, which is a legal meeting of their tribe, calling on the Secretary of the Interior to put all of those royalties into trust until the people could decide how they were spent. That too has fallen on deaf ears. The Secretary has not only not acted, has also never responded. All of the tribal lands were released in a closed-door session. Alatis were not consulted. So even the tribal councils and the constitutions are in violation of the Declaration and are not aligned to it. But they need to be, because in this case, there are billions of dollars at play. When we state this is a national security issue, we told the White House, our problem is your problem, is your solution. But the solution is, I believe, Mr. Rapporteur, to endorse the Declaration without qualification in the United States of America. I do not understand what the United States is reviewing and what they're qualifying, given the last 25 and 30 years that they had full participation into the writing of the Declaration. What exactly are you qualifying? Was your last quarter century participation in the United Nations process in good faith, or was it not? And did you mean what you wrote, or did you not? So it needs to be endorsed without qualification. But in particular, if you would, sir, urge the United States to give their immediate and urgent attention to Fort Berthold, to create a CFR for the 3 affiliated tribes as they did the Osage Nation, to protect their resources and the revenues and the people who own those minerals. Where am I at? A minute? Am I exceeded?
You have about 30 more seconds, so please.
I'll conclude. I thank you, sir.
No,
and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. And again, appreciate the time limit. Our next speaker is Marcia Montereschi.
I'm short. Yeah, I'm honored to be here today. And I thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak, because usually I don't come up before a microphone. But I have much to say. Be strong. You're going to need it. The U.S. government is a big bad boy, and they think they control the world. They're going to try to stop you any way they can. Paragraph 12 in the Special Rapporteur's report, Abel Fattah Moore, who visited Glenabagay's Hogan in 1997, said he was never interfered with as much as he was by the United States in any investigation on human rights around the world. Rena Babbitt Lane, who is here, was beat up by the Bureau of Indian Affairs Rangers for trying to get 3 goats out of a fenced-in area because they were looking for water, and she was denied entrance. The Rangers were waiting for her, went to her house and beat her up. They put her in a pickup truck in the winter. She had no jacket on. When they went through her home to look for guns or something, she walked down the mesa, 15 miles, because they told her they were going to come the next day and get her animals and have the coyotes eat them. She didn't know she had a heart attack. She was trying to save her animals. When I came and I got her, because she went to see me to tell her about the livestock confiscations, she got pneumonia too. They treated her at the hospital. They tried to give her a shot because they weren't going to do any surgery, so they punctured her lung. So part of my job is keeping these grandmas alive. I appeal to you. We have nowhere else to turn. President Shirley, who was the past traitors president of the Navajo Nation, signed off quietly on Healing versus Jones, which was a collusive lawsuit where the Hopi tribe sold the very acreage that the HPL is on and the value of the coal beneath the ground. And he quietly signed off. So what do? We have to appeal to you. May your human rights be the same as environmental justice was intended to be when President Clinton signed the executive order on environmental justice to level the playing field. Let human rights be real. I have the beautiful words of Norris Nez, who couldn't be with us today. Hatathli, medicine man, who talks about people blowing in the wind and what it means to lose your roots from relocation. Can the US government conduct forced relocation in 2012 or 2013? They've committed genocide against the people here. Commissioners have resigned, calling it genocide. You've heard the plight of the people. What we pray for is that you conduct a site visit. You look at bulldozed, fenced off, and capped off water wells. Without water, people can't survive. Without homes, people can't survive. Without livestock, people can't survive. But the people will never leave because this is their roots in the ground. And as Roberta Blacko, the matriarch from Sovereignty in a Nation, said, as far down as you go in the ground, that's how far the ancestors' bones are. We appeal to you to support a petition to UNESCO for World Heritage Site and for the grandmothers to be declared living human treasures. Look at the website that Glenna Begay spoke to. It was a work of 10 years. Jim Zion is going to France, to UNESCO. We got a European Parliament supportive resolution before. What we want is for this land and for the people to be protected because they are the most traditional people left in the United States, and they are the greatest of all treasures. And relocation is forever. Please help.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Leona Morgan.
See you in Black Mesa. Aho.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And while Leona gets ready, if I'll call our last four speakers, Julian Cooney, Patricia Ray, Fern Benally, and then Andrew Curley, if they would come down. Yes, you may begin. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, this is a little low, but good afternoon. My name is Leona Morgan. Yat'e she'e Leona Morgan yinshke torich inin shlent sanabitni bashichin kia ani dashiche and tuoglini dashinala. I'm here to represent a group in Eastern Navajo called the Eastern Navajo Dene. Wait, can I raise this? Okay. I'm representing a group called the Eastern Navajo Dene Against Uranium Mining, or NDOM. And I'm also a fellow Lobo. But anyways, this is a statement, and I'm going to follow up with some quick comments on just an update. On behalf of NDOM, I'd like to thank you for focusing on the human rights challenges facing indigenous nations and communities in the United States. I also thank you for hearing from the grassroots people. Over the course of this conference, you've heard about the many obstacles facing indigenous communities in fully realizing the human rights guaranteed by the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I'd like to bring your attention to one human rights issue in particular, although it's been mentioned several times today. As you're probably already aware, Diné communities continue to face serious threats to their health and culture due to the waste from historic uranium mining and milling. Diné families living near abandoned uranium mines and mills suffer from significantly higher rates of cancer, birth defects, and autoimmune disorders than the general public. The link between these diseases and proximity to radioactive waste from mining is undeniable. Despite this devastating legacy, the United States government is actively facilitating a new push for more uranium mining to propagate a so-called nuclear renaissance. The most prominent example of this is the Crown Point Uranium Project, proposed in Church Rock and Crown Point, New Mexico. Hydro Resources Incorporated, a subsidiary of Texas-based Uranium Resources, Inc., has proposed to mine uranium on 4 sites in those Diné communities, using the in-situ leach or ISL technique. ISL works by injecting chemicals into a uranium-bearing aquifer to deliberately contaminate that aquifer in order to mobilize the uranium for production. Through a series of wells, HRI plans to withdraw the uranium-laden groundwater to the surface for transfer and processing. In the course of mining using the ISL technique, millions of gallons of potable water are contaminated forever. In over 30 years of operational history, no ISL mine has ever restored a mined aquifer to pre-mining conditions. Examples of this are seen in Texas and Wyoming. Additionally, they plan to transport the uranium slurry from Church Rock to Crown Point, about 40 miles away, through several more Diné communities. Even in light of the fact that Hydro Resources project will destroy millions of gallons of water in Crown Point and Church Rock, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission has approved a license for Hydro Resources to do this project and are currently in the renewal process for that license. Worse still, the U.S. EPA has approved a permit called an aquifer exemption for the project's first proposed mine site in Church Rock, which allows HRI to contaminate a portion of the aquifer to do ISL mining. NDOM believes the United States government's approval of this uranium mining project violates the Diné people's human right to safe drinking water, as well as our fundamental rights to a clean environment, health, and the practice of our cultural way of life, especially as it relates to water. Furthermore, the United States government failed to secure the people's full, prior, and informed consent for this project. In fact, in 2005, the Navajo Nation specifically rejected this project and any other uranium mining and processing operations when it passed the Diné Natural Resources Protection Act. Likewise, the Church Rock and Crown Point chapters, along with several others, have passed resolutions opposing the Church Rock and Crown Point uranium project and any further uranium-related projects. Unfortunately, Church Rock and Crown Point are located in the eastern agency of the Navajo Nation, which is a checkerboard area, a matrix of various land types and jurisdictions. HRI's projects are small islands of private land and other land type that are surrounded by Navajo Indian country, and therefore we are not protected by the DNRPA. For this reason, and for the protection of our groundwater, NDOM has filed a complaint against the United States on May 13th, 2011 with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. We await the commencement of that proceeding with hopes that the United States will be held accountable for this violation and the many others it has wrought against the indigenous peoples of this land. I'm almost done. NDOM respectfully asks you to use the power of your office to review the United States' actions in this case and submit recommendations to the United States on ways to prevent the human rights violations that will occur if the Crown Point Uranium Project becomes operational, and remedy the human rights violations that have already occurred in the process of licensing that uranium project.
Thank you very much. Julian, do you want to go last? Julian Cooney.
Yate and greetings. Especially we want to recognize the elders of the indigenous Tohono O'odham people on this sacred land, Tucson, and to all of the elders, to the Rio and Special Rapporteur for the rights, the fundamental freedoms of indigenous peoples, and to the distinguished panel and colleagues and friends. I speak as a person of African indigenous descent who is, I would say, a student of indigenous religions, cultures, and struggle, who also happens to be a professor at this university, which is not relevant. However, I want to say in my experience from all of the testimonies that we have heard, especially from the elders, and also to elevate those of the youth who are not here today, because I consider myself an advocate of the youth of this sacred land, especially. In working with the Tohono O'odham Voice Against the Wall, with the Chienda Nation in San Carlos, and also with the movement to save Dushilish, the San Francisco Peaks, which are sacred for all indigenous peoples in the Southwest, especially to urge the UN Special Rapporteur to consider, one, that there be a concerted effort to underscore the need for the expansion of the notion of human rights, to include the rights of the Mother Earth and all of her creatures, and life on the earth, air and water, and all those beings of the air and the sky and the insects and of the earth who speak a different language and whose voices have been suppressed. In accordance with the fundamental cosmological principle held by all indigenous peoples of the law of nature, as was reiterated earlier, the natural law of the universe that supersedes the narrow definitions of human rights law presupposed by so many Western and other state governmental laws. Specifically, I want to reiterate 5 urgent matters, which I'll hope to crystallize in a few minutes this afternoon. And I thank you for the privilege of sharing some of my thoughts. To immediately address and redress at the global level, in many cases, particularly because of the unreliability, the volatility, and in some instances, flagrant injustice of the United States judicial system, especially when it comes to the refusal to recognize the human rights of indigenous peoples in this land. 1, the protection against desecration by sewage water, water pipelines, and deforestation being pursued by Arizona Snowball and other commercial non-indigenous entities that deny indigenous peoples from gaining access to sacred plants, medicines, and sites in the forests of the San Francisco Peaks, where sacred spirits live and reside. 2, the exposure of the injustice of the compact being advocated by U.S. Senators Kyle and McCain in collusion with some of the authorities that are now urging that the water resources of the Dene and the Hopi become accessible for use by the Peabody Coal Company, and that indigenous peoples be coerced into accepting some form of water lost settlement under threat that if there is no agreement reached, these water resources would be turned into the Arizona state government, which may deprive the Diné and Hopi of even more water resources and rights. 3, to expose at the international level the consistent violation of the religious and cultural rights of the Tohono-O'odham people at the so-called US-Mexico border by non-indigenous entities like the Department of Homeland Security and Border Patrol, from being denied access to their sacred sites and ceremonies, and to terminate immediately the violent harassment, abuse, and detention of indigenous elders and people whose history and existence and heritage precede the existence of the United States, and especially to stop the perpetuating of the killing of migrants, as we just heard, by denying the fundamental human right of water to thirsty people. 3, the reparations to the Chi and their people in San Carlos for the historical cancerous and ill health effects of Agent Orange and the cessation of extractive mining on the Oak Flats mountain range of the Superstition Mountain for deleterious health effects on that community. 4, to demand the unconditional pardon and release of Leonard Foster, the longest-serving indigenous political prisoner of war in this country since 1976. And 5, the advancement and enhancement teaching of indigenous Indian languages, especially in educational curricula and programs from K through 12 levels, especially to children, given the loss, the genocidal loss of language in this country. It is high time that the 500 years of colonization of this sacred land, of the original indigenous peoples of this land, terminate, because Mother Earth ultimately represents the ultimate court of law, and the US government must be legally required to respect and to honor these principles in a respectable way. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Patricia Ray.
Mr. Anaya and distinguished panel, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. The Declaration recognizes the right of Indigenous individuals to organize, to carry out the human right to development. I am the Executive Director of the Shiprock Community Development Corporation, a private, nonprofit, community-based organization. We are in the business of building housing for Navajos and Northern Agency of the Navajo Nation. Given the current market, the only way that we can fund housing projects is by leveraging funding. That simply means that we identify separate pots of money that are needed for a given project. We can look to private funds, outside funds, and for funding of that type, we use funding that is known as tax credits. But tax credits alone are not enough to build meaningful projects. In this case, we also look to access Nahasda Indian housing funds. But those types of funds, sometimes there's a lot of red tape involved if we have to use that type of funding. It sometimes can be very difficult. For example, our project, our nonprofit, built a 96-unit, $14 million rental project in Shiprock. It was very difficult when we started this project. Difficult in the sense that when we accessed Nahasda funds because of all the red tape that was involved in trying to get the project off the ground. The difficulty came in trying to work with the local tribal designated housing entity, the Housing Authority. But I can honestly say that at the time we were very proud to say that our project was built within budget and on schedule. We are currently having problems because the state agency for New Mexico that issues tax credits does not understand development in Indian country and is not giving us the support that we need. Our management board signed a contract or worked with the contract with a non-Indian housing management company to operate our apartments. The non-Indian management company is ignoring Navajo Nation law and the agreements that we signed, and the state agency is refusing to back us up as the federal law requires. Our other problem is that precisely. We must rely on leveraging funds from different sources. We must rely on Nahasda monies. Where the tribal designated housing entity does not follow the requirements for tribal self-determination, we cannot get such funding. Our TDHE is not involving the private sector or nonprofits, or doing proper needs assessment, or involving our community in the annual Indian housing plan, or otherwise following the federal housing self-determination law. That means, in some cases, we cannot develop our housing projects in our area. Why are we having these problems? The idea of self-determination still needs to come into play. There must be a local oversight of the tribal designated housing entity to make certain that it follows proper procedures, and that state agencies need to learn how to carry out their obligation to operate federal tax credit programs in Indian country. It comes to making self-determination work, and we agree that those who say that the key to success and development lies in good governance and management and in following the law. We ask for UN support of that concept.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Fern Benally.
Good afternoon again, and and Honorable Special Rapporteur James and Anaya, and all the dignitaries and the audience. Y'all know my name by now, Fern Benally. I'm a Torachitni, Tuakadabashichin, but Anidashachero, Kintlachini, Dashanala, called Zitlijin, Holgeret Nasha. I'm from Black Mesa. My brother sends his message to the UN. In 1997, the UN Commission on the Human Rights had a historic meeting on Black Mesa in the foothills of Big Mountain. My brother, Norman Benally, and my grandma, Glenna Begay, traveled to Geneva. They requested an investigation on religious intolerance. With the UN Special Rapporteur and its committee landed on the Peabody airstrip on the remote areas of Black Mesa. Many residents and elders greeted them, including my mom and dad, brothers and sisters. It was special to all that the UN would come straight to the heart of Zitlijin. My brother Norman and the rest of my family advocates for the betterment of our community. The UN visit inspired us all. In 2009, we were instrumental in helping start a non-profit organization, Black Mesa United, a grassroots charitable community advocacy organization within the Peabody Western Coal Lease area. The organization has produced a documentary, Voices from Zitlijin. Go to www.empowerblackmesa.org for more information. Further, Peabody Western Coal has mentioned many times it's been mining on Black Mesa for over 45 years. Only 60% of the local residents have electricity. 80% received it within the last 3 years. And this is not from Peabody, nor a gift of any kind from them. Everybody still hauls water in pickup trucks. 0% of residents have access to running water in their homes. As leasehold residents, we struggle for survival every day. After 10 years and many trips to our central government, we finally won a settlement named Mini Meals Project. Water is life, water is sacred. The Navajo Hopi Rights Settlement of 2012, Senate Bill 2109 and House Resolution 4067 has been introduced by Kyle and McCain. The legislation addresses the water rights of the two tribes, and it should, not the corporate greed of Peabody Coal Company and Navajo Generating Station. The USA should not mingle in the sovereignty of the native peoples and call it trust. Integrating the desires of industries in a basic human right violates the rights of the two tribes. We request the Special Rapporteur to continually express that the company leases be standalone negotiations away from the Navajo and Hopi water rights. and limit and illuminate congressional lawmakers and staff as shareholders of coal and other natural resources. The Navajos and Hopis being held hostage in that order to receive monies for their projects is not right. This bill allows NGS and Peabody and CAP to release of damages to them to grant them Hopi and Navajo waters. The two companies refuse to abide by the Navajo preference laws. The federal government lets them get away with much environmental damage and more on Black Mesa. The evidence is buried underground, which damages the precious water, the aquifer, and the Navajo aquifer, as it is called. And I will conclude briefly here. The Navajo and Hopi water rights settlement is not the industrial company's water rights, but the Navajo Nation and the Hopi waters. A lot of waters flow off Black Mesa into the Little Colorado River, but no water infrastructure are on the mesa. Every human being has a basic right to safe access to drinking water. Senator Kyle and John McCain should be investigated for conflict of interest. They also need to be pressured to apologize to the Navajo Nation and Hopi tribes for how they belittle the Navajo Nation and Hopi tribe on national television. Please apologize and do not hide it in a legislation. Discrimination of the Peabody lease. The Peabody Coal Company has been abundant on the residents, and these should be investigated also. Thank you very much.